So I got this shirt that fit me really well 2 years ago, and I went to put this is as good as the tie gets. Apparently I've grown in AA. My name's Danny, I'm an alcoholic, and I'm happy to be here. Long flight up here actually, but it went pretty good. Got here and I know the speakers. I love Pat. Didn't she make a great talk? She always does. And I didn't hear Joe's, but I heard him just recently, and I've heard him a lot, and he's really good. And the other Joe who got left at the airport, I understand is, hey, I'm just going to throw you under the bus. There's two Joes. One of them didn't make it. And anyway, I'm a member of the Cypresswood group of Alcoholics Anonymous, meets at the Lano Club in Spring, Texas. We are, I like to believe, a three legacy group. We don't spend a lot of time preaching to the choir. We kind of go out and go to treatment centers, prisons, and other facilities and places where we are waiting to enter Alcoholics Anonymous. Are there anybody here that's in their first 30 days of sobriety? Raise your hand. Good. Welcome to Alcoholics Anonymous. Welcome to the fastest growing organization in the world. No one wants to join. But if you have what I have, there just isn't a better place to go. This has just been the deal. And so you had all the lights off, and now you turn them back on. What's the deal? Are y'all just, you going to leave them on or off? You don't, off. The crowd has spoken. Joe had to speak in the dark, so I will. Good. Now, I'll have no idea of how you react to what I'm about to say. I've had the gifts of sobriety since February the 18th of '81, and I'm very happy about that. That's not when I came to AA. I have a been around date that's a little earlier than that, but because I used to, when you first come to Alcoholics Anonymous, and if you're like me, I would come in and I would, I'd get a little time, but being sober is very stressful. And I'd have to take a break and come back, and I had been around enough that I realized that if you had time, you seemed to get a little more what I perceived to be respect. So I would come back, I'd just change groups, and I'd have a lot more time, and it was very confusing by the time I finally said, well, I'm drunk, and I used to call that my been around date, because then you'd ask me how much time I got, I'd say, well, I got 3 weeks, but I've been around since, because I didn't want you to think that just because I was drinking that I didn't know what we were doing here, But this has been, on the way up here, I was trying to prepare. I was listening to some podcasts, and I listened to 2 hours of talk of 4 speakers who spoke on the 50th anniversary of Alcoholics Anonymous. It was really something to hear. It was 1989, and I knew all of the speakers, that spoke at that thing. And then here we are. It's now 80 years, and I'm up here. So wow. I usually start my talk with a joke that I've told for years. It doesn't have anything to do with alcoholism. I just tell it because I like the way I do it. I think I'm really good at it. But tonight I'm not going to tell that. That's the correct response. So this, if you heard this before, don't stop me. I want to hear it again. So this lady walks into a pharmacy. She walks up to the pharmacist and says, I'd like to buy some arsenic. And he said, what for? She said, I want to kill my husband. He said, you can't come in here and say something like that. They'll put us both in jail. And she reached into her purse and pulled out a picture of her husband and his wife in bed together and gave it to him. And he said, well, now that's different. I didn't know you had a prescription. Even the Al-Anons like that. So, yeah, I was talking to Joe earlier, and I was thinking, sometimes I get nervous and sometimes I don't. But today, for some reason, I have a little anxiety about talking to you guys, and I don't know why. You're just drunks, but I do. So if I stutter or something, you can just forgive me. I usually, I'll tell you, I was thinking, I came to my first conscious meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous sometime in the fall of 1979. And I had been out drinking with my then wife. I've had several. I'm not like Pat. I don't just have one or two. I've had some wives now. There's just something about getting married that just makes you feel like you're on the right track. I tell the guys that I sponsor, I say, when they come up, they say, well, I want to talk about relationships. Don't talk to me. But if you're getting a divorce, I'm your boy. You just come over and sit with me. You can make it. Anyway, my wife and I were having a family meeting. We were riding around in her car and passing a bottle and insults back and forth. And I had a swollen liver. I was on parole. I hadn't reported to my parole officer in quite some time, several months, actually a year, because I didn't have anything good to report, and I don't like to disappoint, And I had a job, but keeping up with my wife, who had a boyfriend, which was stressing me out. I had to quit my job, and she was a bartender, so I was hanging out with her. And you run out of money, so I had hot checks out everywhere. And I lived in an old beat-up stolen car. It was a horrible car. The guy didn't even want it back. And I wore an eye patch. There wasn't anything wrong with my eye. I just thought I looked really cool, And I had contracted hepatitis, and anyway, that's kind of. And I was 34 years old. I was 34, and we were riding around, and she just stopped in front of this nondescript building and screamed at me and told me to get out of her car. And I got out of the car. She drove off, and I wanted to go. This is before cell phones, and I needed to get a ride, go save my marriage. So I walked into this building, and it was just this nondescript looking building with a circle and triangle on it, and I thought it was an oil company. And I walked up and I opened the door. I wanted to use the phone, call a friend. And I opened the door and I looked in there, and there was some people sitting at a table over in the corner, and they were smoking and drinking coffee. And they saw me. They were very happy to see me. And I asked them if I could use the phone, and they invited me in, and they just started chattering. And they would say things like, if you don't drink, you won't get drunk. And I thought, well, I think you're right. I'm not sure where you're going with that, but I'd kind of like to use the phone. And they talk to you for a while, and they offer you things like orange juice and honey. Well, I said, no, I'm good, thank you. But they said if I'd stay for a meeting, that they'd give me a ride afterwards. So I consented, and I stayed for that meeting. And it was a call-up meeting. They point on you, you come up and say a few things, and the more horrible your story was, the better everybody liked it. And I just thought it was a bizarre place. And I just sat there, and I got there. I was pretty lit, but I began to start to dry out a little bit, And in the big book, it says we become restless, irritable, and discontent until we can again experience that sense of ease and comfort that comes at once from taking a few drinks. I never said that to myself. I never explained it that way. What I did was, my head would start racing. I'd start to get a little knot in my gut. My foot would start patting, and I would think, I got to go. I don't know why I got to go. I can't stay here, but I've got to go. And they had just finished that meeting. Everybody stood up, held the hands, said the Lord's Prayer, and that place just erupts into laughter, everybody talking at the same time. And, and I'm just like, this isn't for me. I got to get out of here. And I started trying to back up towards the door, and it seemed to me that place parted like the Red Sea. And here come this little short guy. He had a flat top, and he's a very dour-looking fellow. And he had a young guy with him, and they were headed straight for me. And I saw them, and I thought, oh, hell no, I ain't going anywhere with him. And he walked up to me, and he said, welcome to Alcoholics Anonymous. We're going to Baskin-Robbins for ice cream. Would you like to go? And I thought, Baskin-Robbins for ice cream. Be still, my beating heart. There is... In my head, what I said was, there's no way on God's green earth that I'm going to go off with a bunch of geriatrics for ice cream while my wife is out with her boyfriend. That ain't happening. And but what came out of my mouth was, sure, I'd love to go. And, so people pleasing will take you places that you need to go sometimes. And I wound up over at Baskin-Robbins holding a melting Rocky Road ice cream while they tried to pitch me on Alcoholics Anonymous, and I'm a bottom line kind of a guy. I don't want the whole story, I just, let's get to the deal. Do you think I'm alcoholic? And the guy would start telling me all about himself. And I thought, I don't think he heard me. So I went and asked another guy. I said, do you think I'm alcoholic? And he did the same thing. I thought, well, no wonder they're here. So you can't find out anything from these people. They're just so self-absorbed. Lights are bright, Joe and Joe. Anyway, that was my introduction to Alcoholics Anonymous, and I'll tell you a little about how I got there. I drank my way there. My mother and father were married on Valentine's Day, 1944. My mother was 14 years old, my dad was 19, and I was born a year later. And we just grew up together. My dad went off and fought in the Second World War, and my mom tried to raise me. They had come out of the Depression, and they didn't know come here from Sikkim. And my mom and I were living down in South Texas when my dad got out of the Navy. He'd been at Okinawa, and he came back, and he was kind of twisted up. And he started drinking to kind of relieve some of the pressure and deal with the things that he had seen and done. And man, he drank. I loved being around him. He was a lot of fun. He cut up, and he liked me. He liked carrying me around with him. He'd take me to the bars with him, and I leave my mom at home, and I just had a great time. My dad loved me. He played with me. He's just a great, big, handsome guy. And my mom was not having a very good experience, though. She'd seeing all the money go out the door, and her husband's drunk and carrying his son around to bars. And she told him if he didn't straighten up, she was going to leave him and take her son. And so he quit. And when he quit, overnight he became this angry, hard-working guy that everything ticked him off. He yelled at people. He was short-tempered. He chain smoked and worked like a banshee. And he was always mad, it seemed like, at me. And I didn't know what went wrong. I had had an experience with my dad where he was playing with me in the backyard when he was drinking, and he holding me to his bare chest, big, strong, handsome guy, and just patting my head, and me feeling like I'm safe. This is, I'm with my dad, and there's no place I'd rather be. I felt on a very visceral level I'm okay, and it's weeks or months later he's screaming at me, and I don't know why. And I just retreated into myself. I have two younger brothers, but they're much younger, so I kind of grew up on my own. I was creating my own little fantasy world. I didn't make friends well. I didn't interact with people well. I didn't have anything against anybody. I just didn't know what you were doing. I didn't know what to say to you. And so I just kind of stuck to myself. I was probably a little bit on the depressive side. By the time I got to middle school, I was pretty twisted up because I've been telling myself stories, and I hadn't been drinking to make them make any sense at all. And life just seemed pretty threatening to me. I went to school one day, and they had they had a film called Duck and Cover. Older people will remember this. Duck and Cover was a film they used to show in schools back in the 50s to tell you what to do in case a nuclear bomb went off in your neighborhood. And what you do, in case you want to know, is you get down on your knees and you take your biggest book and you put it over your head. And I wasn't their best student, and I knew that was woefully inadequate. I'm having a meltdown, and shortly after that, I'm walking with a friend of mine from right after school, and we, on a clear day, in a twin-engine Cessna and a T-33 jet trainer collided in midair right over our heads, and bodies and plane parts and everything just fell all around us. And I just had a meltdown, and I took off running. And I'd run away, and they'd catch me and bring me back. And finally, they put me in Big Spring State Hospital, Clancy's Hospital. And I stayed there and got out. And, nothing's changed. And I haven't had a drink. I don't know anything about that. I just know life doesn't feel right to me, and I don't know what to do. And one day, after I got out, I took my mother's car. And it was an ugly car, too. But I wanted to go hang out with the cool kids. So I took the car. I was going to go down to one of the drive-ins where they all hang out. And I got on my white T-shirt, that was the uniform of the day. You roll your cigarettes up in your sleeve. Scott knows about this. You roll your cigarettes up in your sleeve, and you wear a white T-shirt, and you have these ducktails. And, you drive your cool car and go down to hang out and drink beer with the boys. I drove down there, and as soon as I saw them, I thought, I got to go. I can't do this, because everybody looked like they knew what they were doing. They were having fun. But they saw me, and they called me over, and I wound up smoking a cigarette, and they were drinking beer out of a jug, and they handed me a drink. And I don't know whether it was that drink or several drinks later, something happened to me that it was just magical, and I just was able to relax. And man, that was a great night. I didn't even know it was possible to feel the way I felt. And a few things went wrong. It wasn't terrible, but I got my nose broke, I puked on myself, I wrecked my mother's car, and I wound up in juvenile detention. But none of that really turned out to be my fault after I'd consulted myself over that. And it was very clear to me that I just had to stay away from them. But I'm doing this again. My folks, on the other hand, thought we got him out a little early. And they sent me back to the hospital, and I immediately escaped. And they caught me and brought me back, said, if you do it again, we'll give you shock treatment. So I'm biding my time, and I'm going back and forth, taking my psychotropic drugs, Thorazine. That's a really interesting drug. If you're going to have a slip, don't do that one, because it shuts down everything but what you want shut down. You're able to think, but you can't move. But I had weaned myself off of that stuff, and we were walking over to the cafeteria. And as we was walking along, a lady had got out and left her car running. I mean, is that odd or is that God? I mean, just like right there. I mean, what are you going to do? I mean, so I grabbed I had made two friends. These guys were getting shock treatments, and they became my first real friends. I grabbed these two guys. I said, let's go. They stumbled over and got in the car, and we took off and made that trip about 38 miles over to Midland. And we picked up two more people who should have been in that hospital. And this was the most exciting time of my life, because this is my first gang. I'm their leader. It's the police are looking for us. I mean, it's really exciting, I got a plan. We're going to Mexico. That's going to solve everything. And I'm the kind of guy that will I'll shoot arrows into the wall and then go paint bullseyes around them. And then congratulate myself on being a good shot. So with that kind of track record, I know we're on the right track. we head south, trying to get down to Villacuña, Mexico, where we would be safe. And on the way down there, those guys' meds began to wear off. And it became clear they were in that hospital for a reason. Every time we got out of the car, they'd wander off. It was like herding cats, getting everybody back in the car. But we finally got them in the car and got across the border into Mexico. And I sold that car to a taxi driver for a few hundred pesos, which I thought was a lot of money. It isn't. And we're in Boys Town. We're at the Cadillac bar having a drink, and this is when I realized I'm out of plan. And all of a sudden, there was this big commotion, and one of the guys that I'd brought with me I guess he had some kind of psychotic break, and he killed a parrot that belonged to a girl that worked down there because he thought it said something ugly to him. And so it was a big mess, and they called the police. You know, here come the federales, and a big fight breaks out. I grabbed these guys and said, we got to go back to Texas, and we ran for the international border, and they caught us on the Mexican side, and we went to jail in Mexico. That's what I said. You know, in the doctor's opinion, it also says that the alcoholic's problems pile up on him, become astonishingly difficult to solve. This was one of those instances that bore that truth out, because I'm not bilingual. I didn't know how to tell these people I want my mother. So we do time in Mexico, and eventually my mother finds him. This is before she found Al-Anon. And she drove into the interior of Mexico alone and retrieved me and left those guys down there because she thought they were a bad influence on me. And she brought me back. We got her back across the border, all the way back home. It was my first session with aversion therapy. My mother would hunt for Mexican music on that AM radio and then turn it all the way up. That music would be blaring, and she would quote scripture to me. And the idea was that I would see the error of my ways, quit drinking, and straighten up and get a job. But it worked, really, because I still hate that music. We got home. My family, I was about to turn 17, and my mom and dad had a family meeting, and my dad said, he needs to join the Navy. They'll make a man out of him. I wanted to say, I have a bulletin for you. I'm an escaped mental patient. And but apparently, it really didn't make any difference to the Navy at all. The day I turned 17, I was sworn into the Navy, and gave me a gun. And it was kind of cool. I liked being in the military. I liked everything about I liked having the uniform, being one of the guys. I liked all that stuff. I didn't like getting up early or being told what to do. But I was a CB. I grew big and strong. We island hopped around the Pacific. I was a two-fisted drinker. I had an amazing capacity for booze. And I just couldn't wait to get off from work and go drinking, go partying. But I began to have these episodes where we'd be out drinking and everybody'd go home, and I'd go somewhere else. And I would come to, and I'd be in the wrong place. And this is a big problem if you're in the Navy. And so I get to know the shore patrol, and I'll go to captain's mast, and I'm starting to drink. I'm looking at what I'm drinking. I like tequila, but I don't seem to behave well on it, so I go to beer. I drink only beer until I forget about tequila. And it's just, and I'm starting to withdraw from people. I see that everybody else drinks hard. I see everybody else, parties every night, and they go and sleep it off, and they get up and go to work. Me, I take a drink. I might be in jail in Mexico. I might take a drink, and I might be on the other side of the island of Guam when I'm supposed to be at work. It's just hard to say. I might break down crying. I might have a good time and go to work. In the doctor's opinion, it also says that we can't safely use alcohol in any. My thing is that it didn't hit me every time the same way. Sometimes I felt like a punch-drunk fighter. Sometimes, I had to get back in the ring with that bottle, but I didn't know how I was going to act. And I really needed it to be okay because I couldn't stand being sober. I didn't know I couldn't stand being sober. I just knew I really liked to party. I was the kind of guy that I just liked to pop the clutch and smell the rubber burn. I just wanted to go out and have fun. And being sober, I didn't know what to do with myself. And I'd take a drink, and the first thing I wanted after I took a drink was a drink. And like Billy Smith would say, I drink when I'm already drunk. And it was isolating me from everyone. I was confused about how I was doing. I didn't know what to do. I liked being in the military. I could see myself staying and becoming a part of this, growing, becoming a chief petty officer, being good at my trade. I wanted to do that. That was my goal. I had very few goals in life, but I wanted to make it in the military. But I couldn't do it. I'm always in trouble. I'm always drunk. I'm withdrawing from people. I don't learn good at my job. And then finally it ended. I got drunk with some British sailors on Guam, and went to their ship because they had liquor rations, and I got drunk, passed out, and they went to sea. So this is another one of those. This is a big problem because they, when you go to sea, they always do the muster and do a little count, and they had too many sailors, and it was pretty easy to figure out who wasn't British, so they're not that far out. They send a launch out, get me, bring me back, and it's another captain's mast. We make it back to the States, and it's just pre-Vietnam War, and I'm just getting worse. And one day I got drunk and decided I needed to go to Texas. That's also not okay. And they brought me back, and I sobered up on the way back. I was in handcuffs, and I came back, and I was so ashamed and so beat down that I attempted suicide. I cut my wrist, and I can't tell you if I just wanted pity or attention or if I really wanted to die, but I knew I didn't want to go on doing the way I was, and I was only 19 years old, and I just couldn't take it anymore. I had no idea that this was going to go on until I was 34. But I wound up getting a discharge. I was honorably discharged. I left the Navy. I went down to Skid Row, hung out down in L.A., and I just used up all my money, and I lived on the streets. And I liked Skid Row. I liked the nightlife. I learned to lie, cheat, and steal. I learned the difference between selling blood and selling plasma. And once you're downtown Los Angeles, downtown L.A., it's very hard to get out of there. You got no money, no connections, nothing. And I just live on the streets. And I keep trying to get out of there. And I'd call my folks, and I'd give them a good story, and they'd send me money, and I'd be so relieved that I'd go have a drink. And then everything's gone. And then I got to hustle and try to figure out some way to get them out again. The last time I remember doing this, I was so beat down. I called my mom. I cried for 15 minutes. The story was horrible. I didn't even realize it was that bad. And when I got through crying, she sent me some money, and I was really relieved. And I think, this is it. I'm going home. I'm going to work for my dad. He's got an electrical company. I'm going to change my life. And I'm walking to the bus stop at bus station. And as I'm walking by, I pass a bar. The doors are open. It's got that rolling pleated fake leather, and there's music playing, and there's a kind of a smoky mirror behind the bar. And I remember thinking, I want a Manhattan. I don't even know what a Manhattan is, but I want one. And without another thought, I just walked right in there, and I took a drink. And sometime late that morning, 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, I'm out on the streets. I got no money, and I'm still in L.A. Eventually, I did manage to get out, and I don't want to spend all my time in California. I am from Texas, so I'm just going to skip over there and tell you how things really went to hell from there. I went to work for my dad, but I was bad drunk, and I was combative, and I felt entitled. I felt like everybody owed me something, especially him. And he finally fired me and said, you just got to get away from me. And I started hanging out over on the wrong side of town. I met some guys that were stealing in the oil field, and I started going with them. They were making money, and they had cars and money and guns, and I thought, well, everybody's got to be something. I'm just going to be a gangster. So pretty soon I have guns and money and a car, and I'm drinking Crown Royal, and I'm thinking this is pretty good. And but the Texas Rangers showed up, arrested everybody. Everyone went to prison except for me. I got a probation. And they said, all you have to do is live down the terms of your probation, pay back the money, don't drink, and you're going to be okay. This will be a tough lesson, but it'll be expunged from your record. And I wanted that with more than anything in the world. And my dad had come to see me. He said, what in the world is wrong with you? And I told him the truth. I said, I don't know. But I want to turn my life around. I want to join church. You know, I want to get a job. I want to do right. I want to make you proud. I got out and I had a job, and I lasted 3 weeks. I was pumping gas for this guy, and I looked at him, and he was sitting in his car smoking a cigar, and I thought, he can pump his own damn gas. And I just left the nozzle running in his car, and I went into the cash register, made a cash advance. I went across the street to the bar and had a drink. And when I came to, I was in Dallas, Texas, which is about 300 miles away. And you know, when I'm the kind of guy, when I find myself in a hole, I usually just keep digging, hope you won't see me. And I hook up with some other guys, and we're ripping and running, and pretty soon, you know, my picture is up in places you don't want it. And they've got my brother's schools staked out. They watch my folks' house. They watch my dad's business. You ask my dad, where's Danny? And he'd say, Danny who? And you ask my mom about me, and she'd just hang her head and look the other way. And my brothers were afraid of me. And I finally got arrested, and I got 13 5-year sentences, and I was sent off to Texas Department of Corrections. And what I can tell you about being in prison in Texas, is it's very time-consuming. And I got out, and you know, the whole time I was in there, I would write my mother letters. I mean, we'd write back and forth, because I'd have that conversion. You know, you're in there and you're sober, and you're sullen, and you know things have got to change. I can't drink in a place like this. I got to watch myself. And I'd write my mother letters back and forth, and she was so happy for me, and I was so happy, and I was going to get out and do good. You know, and 3 years go by, they pick me up. I get out, and you know, and I had made up my mind I would never drink whiskey again except on special occasions. Turns out getting out of prison is very special. And I got out, and my mom picked me up. She was in a great mood, and I got a pint of whiskey, and we're going to make that 300-mile ride back to Midland. And I got in the back seat of the car, and I took a few hits, and man, I hit that sweet spot. I mean, it was just like the best ever. My mom was in a good mood. I'm out. I got $50 in my pocket, and I'm feeling good, and I got plans. And and I'm not one of those guys. I don't take a drink and I get all slurred and sleepy, and I take a drink and I got to get dressed. We're going somewhere. We're going to do something. It winds me up, and I'm happy, and we're stopping in places to get gas, and I'm going and visiting with everybody. And on the way back, my mom said, son, you know, what you need is a wife, a kid, a car, a bank account, a job, and a house. You'd be okay. So I started looking for a woman that had kids, a bank account, a job, and a car. And I found her, and I married her right away. And my mother was wrong. That was the worst 2 weeks of my life. I left her, and I started hanging out downtown at my bar in Odessa, and I met another girl. She was crying. Things were just not good for her. Found out she was pregnant. She couldn't go home because there was a social stigma attached to that in the 60s. And so she wanted to go home, but her folks wouldn't let her. And we hatched a plan that night. We'd just get married, and then we'd go. That way I'd have a home to go to, and she could go home. So in Texas, you have to wait 3 days. You know, they want to be sure you're in love. So we hung out and drank and partied, and 3 days passed. We get married. We're drunk when we get married. I call my mother collect and say, Mom, I'm married. And she said, I know. And I said, I don't know how you could. I just did it. And she said, oh my God, you have a wife. And I thought, details. I'm just always getting tripped up with these details. And so we decided to go on our honeymoon. We took that long bus ride to McAlester, Oklahoma, and I was picked up by my new father-in-law. My new father-in-law took us to his house. It was a big mansion, and I went upstairs, passed out, went downstairs to have a cigarette, and looked out across this big yard of his, and I saw the McAllister State Penitentiary, and I had married the warden's daughter. So I was very uncomfortable in that relationship. So I absconded. That means to move in a secret way. And I went back to Odessa. I headed back to Odessa, and my mother arranged I got a divorce and an annulment at the same time. And she just walked in the courtroom and told the judge what a flake I was, and arranged that. And I got, now I'm in love, but I don't know who with. And I'm hanging out at a bar, and it's about this time my life took a turn for the worse. And I met a little old girl. She came in there, and she was pretty. We loved each other instantly. I mean, it was that kind of love. You don't usually fall in love at that depth until you get to a treatment center. But yeah, I was lucky. And but I'm hanging out in bars and I'm starting to take pills and drink, and the book talks about that and about the rounds of asylums. I wasn't making a rounds of asylums, but I'm in and out of jail, and I'm in a lot of trouble, and I run with the wrong crowd. I can't hold down a job, and I'm violent. And that girl had to leave me because she had to protect herself. I was dangerous to be around. And when she was gone, she was killed in a car wreck. And I had no tools for dealing with that. As sick as I was and as sick as she was, I loved her the best I knew how. And I didn't feel bad for her or her family. I felt angry at everybody and everything and sorry for myself. And I picked up a gun and a bottle of whiskey, and I went on a crime spree, and I got 10 years in the penitentiary. And while I was in the penitentiary, I realized that my problem was that I needed an education, and I needed to change my life. I needed to improve myself. Drinking was still not my problem. My problem was I'm a criminal. That is a big problem, by the way. And I needed an education, and you do need that. But that became my solution, self-knowledge. I'm going to learn this up. I practiced creative visualization. I did meditation. I did everything I could. I wrote letters to my mom and my brothers, and everybody could see that this time I was really serious. And I was. And I got out of prison, and I got a job, and I had everything I needed. I lived in a little place, and I was being good. I was drinking only beer and only on the weekends. I had some long weekends. But I'm doing the best I've ever done in my life. For the first time I've ever had my own car, the first time I had my own bank account, and I got everything, but I'm not married, and that's not acceptable. So I went looking for a wife, and I found her. She was dancing on top of a table, and I would have loved you. I saw her, and I knew that was my wife, and I married her, and I'm going to tell you, my life changed. She'd carry out the trash, be gone 3 days. I needed Al-Anon right away. And the craziness of alcoholism just sticks in. Everything just blurs. I can't tell you any more than you can tell me the blow by blow of the misery of waking up, sweating, waking up in the middle of the night with night sweats, full of fear, not knowing what to do or why you're like this. Wondering why, what happened, looking at everybody around me. And I hated it. I hated people because they were successful and I wasn't. And I hated God. And I don't mean passively, I mean actively did. And I wanted nothing to do with anybody. I just wanted money because I thought that would solve everything. I had gotten myself in a ton of trouble. I can't report to my parole officer. They're going to send me back to the penitentiary. My wife's got a boyfriend, and she kicks me out of the car into Alcoholics Anonymous. I walked into the most remarkable organization in the world. I didn't know at the time that I would have told you that was the lowest, the crappiest thing that ever happened. And what happened actually was that she kicked me out, and I got a brand new life. It took me a while to get a start, but you guys were just awesome because like Pat was talking about, nobody kicked me out. Nobody ever talked mean to me. We all talk about our sponsors being mean. Well, they weren't mean. They were just honest. It felt mean to me. I didn't want anybody telling me I was a liar, a cheat, and a thief. I mean, how you going to keep friends telling people like things like that? You know? But that's the way you are. And I ran from Midland to Odessa and Dallas and Austin. I'm on the road, and I'm showing up in different AA groups. I'm living underground. And finally, I crashed and burned in February of '81. And I came to in the backseat of that old car, and I was holding 3 old Milwaukee beers. And I was puking bile and blood. And in California, I heard this. There was this, it's a cool saying. California gives all kinds of cool sayings, you know. There's a bottom below the bottom you know. It didn't feel like that at all to me. It felt like I was seeping and just sinking into an endless, deep pit that there was no end to. And I was frightened and sick, and I couldn't stay drunk, and I couldn't stay sober, and I didn't want to go back to prison, and I wanted to die, and I was afraid to die. And I said, God, I'll do anything if I could just get sober. And apparently he heard me because 2 guys came to get me from the club. And I rode back to the club with them, and a guy named John Henry, who became my first sponsor, and a young guy with him. And I said, John, what am I going to do? And he said, Danny, if you don't drink, you won't get drunk. I said, well, how do you do that? He said, well, don't drink right now. And then when it's right now again, don't drink then either. And that kid said, yeah, and pretty soon you'll have like a minute. And John said, you know, you don't listen to him. He said, let me tell you something. Alcoholics Anonymous has no failure. You do this thing that we do. You join us in this thing we do, and you'll find yourself a sober, self-respecting member of Alcoholics Anonymous with a host of friends. And better than that, he said, you'll have a relationship with the power that runs this universe. And I'm telling you, drunk on the way to the club, I was smitten with a magnificent obsession for sobriety. I wanted to be with you and like you more than anything else in the world. And I started showing up at the club. And instead of being the guy I had been all along, the guy that comes in and borrows money, the guy that comes in and hits on the girls, the guy that you just look at him and think, he ain't going to make it. I'm in there, I'm early, and I'm helping set up. You know, I've listened when people are talking. And pretty soon those old timers are saying, you're doing good, kid. And that was music to my ears. And they gave me a big box a shoebox full of cassettes and a cassette player. And I'd ride around that old car and listen to those talks. I'd listen to Wino Joe, and I'd listen to Chuck Chamberlain and so many others. And I'd laugh and I'd cry. And I remember one day riding around just sweating in that car, thinking of all the stuff that was starting to pile up on me, and I just couldn't take it anymore. And I thought, they're always saying, let go and let God. And I thought, what do you let him do? Well, let what? And I knew that John Henry would know. And I drove up to the club, and John Henry was there. He was holding a cup of coffee. I saw him, and I said, John Henry, I'm an alcoholic. He said, yeah, you are. Come on in this house. He said, come on in this house. And I walked in, and I went back to one of these little counseling rooms they had. And he told me about himself, and he listened to me for a while. And he said, Danny, there are people that sit in Alcoholics Anonymous and go to meetings, and they seem to be fine. He said, I don't know anything about that. He said, there are other people who have no alternative but to experience a psychic change. The change is talked about in the book. He said, you don't just take steps. You have to experience the 12 steps. That will change your life. And you don't have any time to wait. And I got on my knees with him, as awkward as it felt, and I said the 3rd step prayer. And he had me write an inventory. And I wrote that thing. I hid it all over that old car because I was afraid somebody'd find it. I found him, and I shared that inventory. And when it was over, he said, I want you to go down by Town Lake and think about what you've just said. Because if you want to live like that, you don't need any help. But if you want to be different, he said, only God in this program is going to be able to change your life. And I drove down there for the first time in my life, having told the truth about everything I could remember, having owned up to the fact that I was a prideful, arrogant, self-serving person who cared about nothing but getting his way. and I wanted to be different, and I didn't know how. And I stepped out of that car, and I just felt this power wash over me and through me, and it stayed with me all afternoon. And I thought, he's real. And I just felt healed. I felt changed. And I thought, man, I'm going to go back to that club. I'm going to start chairing meetings. You know, I'm all in now. And I love Alcoholics Anonymous. And I became a 12-stepping fool. They had a payphone. I answered it every time, and I'd go looking for you. I had one guy that I sponsored. I hadn't done all the steps. I just stopped right. I became amazed before I was halfway through. You know, sometimes that's what a spiritual experience will do for you. It'll hamper a spiritual awakening. You know, so I was amazed. I didn't know that Alcoholics Anonymous. I heard someone say this recently, and it just rang true. I think it was Jeff V. said it. You get happy when you get sober, but you get joy when you experience helping someone else get sober. I absolutely agree with that. But at the time, I felt better. That's always been my goal. Danny needs to feel better. I didn't know what Alcoholics Anonymous was about. I didn't know that I needed to go back to people that I had run over and give them a chance to feel better. It wasn't about going and taking my punishment. It was about going back and picking somebody up that you'd knocked down and admitting that you did that. And I didn't want to do that. I had too much stuff going on. I decided I'd live underground in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I'd be a 12-stepper. I'd do day work for you guys, and I'd just live in Austin like a hippie, you know. And I was doing good for about 6 months. And I suddenly started to have this meltdown. My head starts racing. My foot starts patting. I said, I can't take it. I got to go. It's just too much. And I called John Henry and said, I'm leaving. And he said, meet me at the club. And I met him at the club, and he said, Danny, what's standing between you and that power that you experienced are the things that are on your 8-step list. And I said, well, there's some things that I didn't tell you about. And he said, what are they? I said, well, one, I'm living in a stolen car. He said, well, that's a problem. And I said, the other thing is there was a bank robbery in San Angelo, Texas in the summer of 1980. And they've got it on videotape, and they've been to my folks' house, and they've tried to get hold of my parole officer. They want me. And he said, well, son, you've got to go in and clean that up. And I said, oh, no. No. He said, you told me when we started that you were willing to go to any length to have this gift. I said, that is theory. This is very serious right here. He said, then get another sponsor because you won't make it with that. I sat out in that car, and I just had that sinking feeling. And I said, God, I'm too afraid. I want to, but I'm just too afraid. They'll lock me up forever. And I said, if you want me to do it, you'll have to help. And it seemed to me in just moments, I had this peace, and I had an epiphany that 4 walls do not make a prison. Prison is something you carry around on the inside of you. And I had the keys to the kingdom. I could run like I always had, or I could follow your example. And the next day I went down to the Austin Police Department. I parked that car a long ways away. And I walked in, I told them who I was. They sent me up to the robbery department, and the detectives came in. I gave them my AA pitch. And they asked me where I'd been. I told them all about my good work. And they pulled that video out, and they played it. It's a grainy black and white video, about 15 seconds long, of a tall, skinny guy with a black hat going from till to till, wore a beard like me. And he played it twice. And the second time he played it, I just thought, I'm so screwed. I wonder what I did with the money. And the second time he played it, he turned around and he looked at me and he said, the guy I'm looking for wouldn't walk in here. The guy I'm looking for is out there. And he said, you need to get your skinny butt back to AA, and maybe you can do something about the mess you created. I'm in AA forever. I'm not afraid of making amends anymore. I'll make yours. I don't care. You know, I'm good to go now. I was sure that wouldn't happen. I've had 38 years of the most incredible life. I have nothing going for me. I got no education. I got no real trade. I'm a loser. I'm an ex-convict, ex-mental patient. I can't stay married. I got nothing. And I'd sit in meetings and talk about that. And my sponsor told me, he said, Danny, listen to me. That man's dead. That man will drink again. He said, you're a new creation. You're a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. You reach for the stars. You just get out there. If you think you can do it, do it. And I started believing that, and I started acting that way. And I've had just a wonderful life. I'm going to tell you, I've been bankrupt, I've been rich, I've had heartbreak, I've had happiness, I've had success that I thought was this is it. I've reached into my 30s in sobriety, and I thought that once you got to as old as I am and as long sober as I am, that people just came up and said, well, what do I do? And I'd just tell them. I had no idea that these old guys didn't know any more than this. And that God is in charge now, and He always will be. And I've lived a wonderful life. I went through a really difficult year last year. Just talking to one of the Joes. I had a serious heart problem, but nearly did me in. I nearly lost my business. I did lose my wife. My mother died, and my dog died. And but you know what I did? I called my guys that I sponsored. I called my sponsor, and I go to Alcoholics Anonymous, and I just hurt on the inside. And I had my anger, and finally the dam broke, and I started the healing again, just like we always do. Alcoholics Anonymous has done everything for me. My dad, I wanted to make amends to my dad. I loved my dad. I wanted him to be proud of me, but he didn't understand somebody like me. He was one of the greatest generations, sort of the salt of the earth. His word was his bond. And I first went to try to make amends to him. He said, son, it's fine. I'm glad you're sober. Let's just get on with it. And there was this big gulf between us. And I asked you, I said, how do I straighten this out? And you said, continue to be a good son. Continue to be a good member of Alcoholics Anonymous. Carry this message. Call your parents on special days. You go see them. Doesn't matter what their response is. 20 years sober, I had to go to Midland where they lived for some business. I stayed at their house, and I went to a meeting. When I came home, my mother was waiting up on me, and I walked in. I saw my dad in his bedroom. And I just looked back there, and I said, is he asleep? And she said, he's just pretending to be. And I walked in to say goodnight. And as I walked towards him and I looked down, he wasn't this big, strong man anymore. He was in his 80s, and time had worn him down. And he was bald-headed, and on an impulse, I just leaned down and I kissed him on his old bald head, and I said, Pop, I love you. And before I could pull away, he reached up and he pulled my head to his bare chest, and he patted my head. And he said, I didn't know what to do, boy. And I said, me neither, Pop. He said, those people in AA, I hope you'll always remember to tell them how much we appreciate what you've done for us. Because you didn't just get me sober, but you healed a family. Nothing we do is in isolation. Alcoholics Anonymous is the most amazing thing in the world. The more broken you are, the more powerful God can use you. God has been the answer for everything in my life. I wanted a different answer. There is no middle-of-the-road solution. You can go this way and try to blot out. At first, if you're sober a while, you'll try to blot it out with sex, spending, whatever. But alcoholism is after you. And if you keep that way, it's right on the other side of that operation is drunk. Or you can go the other way. And that's the way that it leads to God. It leads to fellowship. It leads to being in a home group, being a member, being transparent, living life, pain shown, happiness shown, and helping people. I have a life that's second to none. I live in a big house with a swimming pool that I'd like to fill up with dirt. And I got a business. I'm respected in my community. I pay my taxes. I know all you guys, and I speak around the country. On my 25th AA birthday, I was speaking in Thailand. Can you believe that? I mean, how in the heck does that happen? The guy called and asked me, he said, would you like to speak in Thailand? And I said, is this some kind of a joke? He said, no, mate. I said, when? He said, February. I said, February when? He said, February the 18th, Saturday night. I said, that's my 25th AA birthday. He said, happy birthday from God. I'll say this and shut up. A lot of people get all upset about how quick it takes to get back with the family, how hard it is. I called my mom on my first birthday, and not much had changed. I pretty much looked just like I did when I was drinking, because I wasn't. And I called her and I said, Mom, I'm a year sober. And she said, yeah, you bet, and hung up. And I thought, oh, I cannot believe after all I've done and put the... And I went to a meeting and whined about it. Finally, John Henry found out about it. And he said, you know, Danny, alcoholism is what's wrong with you. You treat it through the experience of the 12 steps. You can't go a little ways and stop. This is a way of life that over and over you come to that place of surrender and you let God lead you and you walk hand in hand with people. It's not hard. It's scary from where you stand, but it's not hard, and it's wonderful because you finally have the love and give the love that you've always wanted. It's just been the most remarkable thing. By the way, I called my mother when I was 27 years sober. I said, Mom, I'm 27 years sober. She said, well, of course you are. Now quit calling so late. God bless you. I love you. Thank you.